Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast, where we dive deep into the intersection of career, family, and finances. Learn the mindsets, tips, and strategies to help you on your personal journey to build a life of abundance and purpose for you and your family. Now here's your host, Ameen. Welcome to a special live episode of the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. This week's episode was recorded live on Twitter Spaces, where I was interviewed by the anonymous account Thou Shall Not. He and I engaged back and forth on Twitter for a few months before we decided to hop on the mic and go live for this interview. He asked me some great questions about why I got into real estate, how we decided on going into long distance rentals, and what my predictions are for the future. This episode got pretty personal, and we cut deep into the real reasons I decided to take this path. I hope you enjoy.
Aaron, thank you so much for joining, man. How's your week been going?
Of course, man. Happy to be here. Appreciate you inviting me to come hang out with you on a Friday afternoon. Week is going very well. I've got my newborn twins. They're about 2 months old, hanging in the other room with the babysitter. So I was able to sneak away for a little bit to have this conversation.
Nice. How's having sleepless nights going for you?
About as you would expect. Yeah, I'm more concerned for trying to help my wife get some sleep. She's definitely bearing the brunt of it with all the feedings and whatnot. But yeah, we're about 2 months in, so I'm pretty well adjusted now to getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. And yeah, we take shifts, and then we have got some childcare coverage now, but it's all part of the process. And we're very fortunate to have 2 healthy, happy babies, and Mama's recovering.
Nice, man. That's awesome to hear. Congratulations. It's always exciting when people are producing kids, especially the right type of people. I know that's a little not PC to say, but it's what I truly believe. I feel like a lot of my friends that should be having kids are leaning away from that a little bit. I'm just like, no, we need more people like you in this world. But yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah, we're future real estate investors getting ready. They've already heard me on the phone and have lots of conversations and send in offers and all that jazz. So either they'll love it and want to do it themselves, or they'll be so sick of it by the time they're at the age to do it themselves that they'll want nothing to do with it. We'll see.
Yeah, I feel like it's only natural to go onto this curve. Growing up, my father was in construction, and my entire life I was just pushing against it and just rebellious teenager and all that stuff. And here I am as a grown man doing real estate investing and residential construction and things of that nature. So it's funny how things work out like that. But yeah, I'd love to just start off of just hearing your story, just how you got into investing, what kind of led you here.
Sure, man. I see some familiar faces in here. I love doing spaces. So thanks again for having me. My name is Ameen. I also go by the Hybrid Real Estate Professional. I write a newsletter and host a podcast of the same name. My wife and I own 8 single-family long-term rentals spread out across Nevada, Washington State, and Iowa. I also work full-time. I have a full-time W-2 as a business manager at a management consulting firm. And I am also a coach. I coach one-on-one and group coaching for investors looking to get into remote real estate investing. So basically, the whole meat of the programs that I teach are how to invest from anywhere in the country. So we are 1,000 miles away from our closest rental. We live down in Houston, Texas now. Our closest rentals are in Iowa, and our furthest ones are almost 3,000 miles away. A large part of what I teach and the message I try and spread online and through my coaching program is just how to get over the fear and the anxiety that comes with putting your money and investing in something that is out of sight and sometimes out of mind. But by doing so, unlocking all the potential that there is all across the country. I believe strongly in real estate as part of a diversified portfolio of investments. And I know it is possible for just about anyone with the right education and the right network and the right tools. And then, as you may have heard at the beginning, I am a father of 3. So I have a 2-year-old daughter and 2 baby twin boys. And so everything I'm doing, I'd like to think is in service of building an abundant life, both spiritually, mentally, financially, in every way for for myself and my family.
Nice, man. It's definitely a good reason to do things. I'm personally have been shifting towards that kind of mentality myself. When I was younger, it was just all about, oh, let's make as much money as possible. And now that I'm in like a stable and healthy relationship and talking about marriage and having kids and stuff, it's definitely a lot more fruitful to be working towards that kind of objective versus just money.
Yeah, for sure. It all starts somewhere, right? Like I'll say in my 20s, I met my wife. We started dating when we were both 23. We met. It was one of those almost fairy tale type stories. She was visiting, presenting research at a conference. A mutual friend of ours introduced us. She was in Illinois at the time. I lived in Seattle. And we essentially fell in love at first sight. And we decided to do this long distance relationship for almost 2 years. But once we realized that, hey, this was not just a fleeting early 20s fling, we were people we wanted to build lives together with. Our mindset changed a bit. And I think it gave us that long term mindset at an earlier age than maybe it could have. We didn't get married until 2018. So that was about 5 years after we met. But we started building a life together and looking ahead to the future. We knew we wanted to start a family at some point. We knew we wanted kids, but we started putting pieces in place, both financially and otherwise, to focus to be a little more forward looking. But we started buying rentals before we had kids. And actually, the majority of them we bought were when we were both still working full time and we didn't have kids yet. The strategies that we use, I can get into each one of the rentals and how we got them, but a lot of it was predicated on dual income, no kids, which is obviously that's very different than the situation we're in right now with three young kids. Young kids have enormous expense attached to them. And then my wife also dialed back to only part time work. So our financial profile has changed quite a bit. Real estate investing and the 8 rentals we were able to buy and the cash flow from those rentals has played a huge part in giving us some breathing room while we figure out what our long term looks like financially. But yeah, that was all part of the journey. And I think it started long before we had kids. And when we shifted our mindset to, hey, we're building a life together over a long time horizon. And so let's start putting some pieces in place.
Nice, nice. I mean, I might be like grasping at straws here. One of the big things that I admire about you is, as you mentioned, your your rentals are all out of state, right? So personally, if I don't have a 20-minute driving distance to whatever property I'm going to be touching, I don't want it. Out of state rentals have always freaked me out. I know, heard great success stories. I've heard nightmare stories. It's just always been a little bit outside of my risk profile. So it's funny that you mentioned that you're like in a long-term, long distance relationship. And now here you are as an investor, doing long distance investing. So I'd love to learn more as to like why you chose that avenue, particularly, especially as somebody who's, I don't want to be like mean or not mean, but we're not big players in this space, right? It takes a lot of like balls to go out of state investing. So I'd love to hear your thought process as to why you chose that avenue with your first couple rentals versus staying local.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, let's talk about that. So I wouldn't say I chose the strategy. I would say the strategy chose me by virtue of the circumstances. So the first rentals we bought while we were living in Las Vegas. So we lived there from 2015 to 2020. We bought our first primary home in 2017 that we actually lived in for 3 years. We got married in the backyard. It was one of those, it was a home that was near and dear to our heart. And I'll take a little sidestep from the portfolio to just give some more context. So around that time, I was working in the entertainment industry. I worked for a large concert promoter. I won't name them, but they're the largest in the world. And so I was really picture working in the concerts industry in Las Vegas. It's probably exactly what you think it would be like. A lot of late nights, a lot of partying, good times, but very exhausting and grueling. Entertainment industry is notoriously underpaid and overworked. So I had a really good time, but it was chipping away at my mental health and my physical health. And I wasn't doing myself any favors by totally giving into the whole party lifestyle and essentially put myself on not so great a path. And my relationship with my wife, was very strong throughout. She's been incredibly supportive. But essentially, we bought that house in 2017. All my habits and vices took a downward turn over the next couple of years. And in 2019, I ended myself up in a short stint in inpatient rehab for alcohol. And very quickly, I'm very grateful that that was a one stop. A lot of people struggle when they make those type of changes, but I was able to have it be a one and done. I visited May 2nd, 2019 was my sobriety date, and I'm coming up on 5 years now. And the reason I give all that context is I was channeling all this energy into my vices, into a career that was fun, but it was working me harder than I was getting value out of it. And when we talk about this like W-2 employee mindset, I think there are careers that can serve mutual benefit to both the employee and the employer. And I felt a very strong imbalance in that situation. And I grew all this resentment towards my employer and my bosses. And that's what led to some of that destructive behavior. So, anyway, when I came out of rehab, I had all this fresh new energy, a revitalized feeling of motivation to do something positive for myself and for my wife and for our future family. So, now back to real estate. In 2019, we decided to buy our first rental right down the street from where we lived in downtown Las Vegas. And we got married in our backyard. So we spent $225 on our wedding, $150 for the minister, and $75 for the court fees. Because you could pretty much walk down the street and walk into the courthouse and apply for a marriage license and get it all sealed up same day. That's the beauty of Las Vegas. And so we bought our first rental property down the street from us with the money that we would have used on our wedding. And my parents, this is a whole other story, but they have been real estate investors since the early 2000s. So I didn't read any Bigger Pockets books. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have any of the tools that I think probably most of the people listening to this have. I leaned very heavily on my parents to educate me in that first rental. I saw them go through a lot of ups and downs throughout the recession. They owned through the early 2000s, which was a boom, and they owned through the recession, which was a bust. And so but I saw that they were still invested. And I said, okay, if they're still invested after such an unbelievable disruption in 2008 through 2012, it must be worth their time. And so we bought that rental property down the street. And so that was not out of state. That was not long distance. And then the agent that sold us that house called us 4 months later and he said, Aaron, he actually sent us an email. He said, this just came across my desk. I have two houses. They're being sold as a package off market. They're on 5-year leases. It's a company that offers assisted living for people with developmental disabilities. They're paying 30% above market rent, and their intention is to re-sign 5-year leases basically forever. And so we went from this kind of maybe this will be a hobby to owning 3 rentals. We dumped out every penny in our piggy bank to figure out how to buy these houses because the opportunity was so clear with those basically no vacancy, above market rent. We had to figure out a way to make it work. So we went from 0 rentals to 3 in about 5 months. And I'm getting to the long distance part, and I'm going to pause a little bit because there's plenty more to the story. But what happened is that got us into long distance investing was in 2020, the entertainment industry shut down in a heartbeat, right? I remember very clearly on a Friday night. Yeah, I think everyone remembers that week when stuff was starting to shut down. But being in the entertainment industry, we were even more keenly aware of it because I had shows Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday every week. And I remember it was Friday night at about 9 p.m. and Live Nation. Oh, I'd accidentally said the name of the employer, but the company sent out an email across the whole company and basically said, we were pulling all shows effective immediately. The Saturday show's not happening and we don't know when they're going to come back online. And so in a moment, basically my job and the career I had been building for a decade came to a screeching halt. I didn't lose my job, but essentially they made it clear that they were going to keep us on long enough to help manage the logistics of all the cancellations. And then they were going to furlough the position. And then we could either wait around for our jobs to come back. And at the time, people were saying, oh, maybe Concerts could be back by June or they could be back by 2025. We don't know. So I had to make a tough choice. And we ended up moving back to Washington State, which is where I grew up and where I went to college. And so this is where long distance real estate came in. We basically were like, holy shit, we have 4 houses. They were down the street from us before. What do we do? Sell all of them or do we keep them? And a house in Seattle, if we wanted to buy a primary house, we probably would have had to sell at least three, if not four, all four of those to buy a primary house. And we said, you know what? We have spent so much time and effort into building this property portfolio in Vegas. It would be such a shame in our late 20s to sacrifice what could be such a powerful thing for our family just so we can buy a primary house in Seattle. So we decided to rent in Seattle and keep our Vegas houses. And we ended up self-managing those from out of state. So I want to pause there. That was a long-winded introduction, but that's like my genesis.
That was amazing. Your story is incredible. The fact that you had so much growth in such a short time frame and were able to manage that, I think is not very common. And it motivates me to get back on the horse, to be sympathetic to the situation that you had with the nightlife and entertainment industry. Like, I had a similar kind of story. I got out of the military, was just some 21-year-old dipshit without a college degree, and fell on my face into the world of real estate just by luck. I was, doing remodels as a contractor and befriended one of my biggest clients, and he showed me the ropes of fix and flips. And I was a young kid, moved to Denver, Colorado, and just immersed myself in the nightlife there. My brother was like a promoter out there, and this was in 2014, 15. Marijuana just got legalized there. So the entire city was just a nonstop party. And when you throw a bunch of money at a kid who doesn't have any sort of quote unquote real world experience, it led me down a rabbit hole of partying a lot and developing my own kind of addictions. And I ended up losing my shirt financially, moved back to the tri-state area to get my feet underneath me. And here I am putting the pieces back together slowly and getting back into the world of real estate. So I'm really sympathetic to hearing your story, as I could resonate a lot with that, and seeing where you're at motivates me a lot to get back to a solid position in the world of real estate. In terms of the talk about your wife a lot, and I think that's really key. I know we have a few listeners here that recently got married or recently just purchased their first home with their spouse. One big thing that I might have to have your wife talk to my girlfriend is about the wedding costs, right? I think we're at this day and age where big financial decisions like that, especially around of like how much money we're going to spend on our wedding, are often overlooked or just not spoken about. And the kind of like generic go ahead option is to just spend $20,000-$30,000 on a wedding, which is outrageous, especially if you've been saving for years, and that money can go towards a house payment. So just before dipping back into the real estate conversation, if we could just pivot from here, I would love to understand, like, how did that conversation go with your wife at the time? Because it's something that I talk a lot about with my girlfriend. And fortunately, she's on the same path and mindset financially with me, where we both agree it doesn't make sense to spend a bunch of money on a wedding, and would rather allocate that money in a more beneficial way. But for people who aren't fortunate enough to be in that position, like, how did the conversation go about, were you guys just always aligned about finances, or was this like a uncomfortable conversation that you guys had to bring up with each other?
I love this question. And it's something I haven't chatted about openly on the air before. But yeah, so first I want to say I don't in any way think that it is anything but a personal decision, right? Anyone who has a wedding, a more traditional wedding where it is expensive and you gather people around, whether it's a destination or a local venue, power to you, right? Like I think that I've had some of the most fun I've ever had in my life at other people's weddings. I just know that for me and for my wife, we were very aligned going into it, that the level of expectations, if we were to spend 20, 30, $40,000 on a wedding, it would be so hard to meet our expectations for everything going perfectly. And the last thing you want to do on your wedding day is be even remotely disappointed or have that feeling like, oh, I wanted this to be perfect. You visualize it, you plan it for a year, you spend all this money, you line all this stuff up, you get the band, you get it's just so much expectation setting that I felt the opportunity to be disappointed was very high. I also think that unfortunately, in many situations, when you have those bigger weddings, it ends up not being about the couple as much as parents are chipping in money and they have their own expectations. You have 200, even 100 or 50, however many people all wanting to see you and spend time with you. They have their own expectation. It just becomes so much about everything other than the sanctity of your relationship with your spouse, which is we wanted a focus on that. And I'll be very honest, what happened is that we were already feeling that way. And we literally decided to get married on a whim. Like, same night, we called the minister. We weren't engaged for any period of time. And we basically said, we have been operating like we've been married for 5, 6 years, basically since the day we met. But we moved together, we've been together, we've gone through ups and downs. There is no reason to have an engagement period and prolong and all this planning. Let's just skip to the part where we're building a happy life together. Yes, it very much deviating from real estate and sharing that, but I think we were in pretty fierce alignment about that. And if anything, that set the tone well for us as we started to plot our ambitions of building a real estate portfolio and getting ready for having kids. It allowed us to skip a few steps and just get to the part that meant the most to us.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty, and I hope you're not upset that I asked the question or prying. To me, it's an important topic just because I think a lot of people think that real estate is a very one dimensional aspect of life when in reality, especially if you're not a high kind of W-2 income earner, the choices you make in terms of like your partner, when to get married, when to have kids, all these things impact your future of investing and how you invest in real estate. So I definitely, to me, it's a really important conversation. I really liked your answer. Again, I apologize if putting you on the spot asking something like that, but let's segue it back into real estate. So we left off. Now you're in Washington. You didn't want to buy a primary residence. You have all these rentals that are hundreds, thousands of miles away from you. You mentioned you were managing all of them yourself. What made you guys choose managing the properties individually versus hiring out of state property managers and things of that nature?
Sure. So picture the timing as well, right? So I was furloughed from my job in May of 2020. Las Vegas, so the national unemployment average during COVID was like, I think it was 14.9%. Vegas was 25%. So a quarter of the town was unemployed. There's a lot of fear around, there was an eviction moratorium. Um, were things even going to be stabilized? And frankly, the idea of trying to onboard a property manager during all that while we were still ourselves trying to figure out how to move out of our primary home it just seemed a lot cleaner and easier for us to figure out how to do it on our own. We had tenants in our 3 rentals. So the only thing we had to really coordinate was finding a tenant for our house that we were moving out of, which I was able to do just by advertising and using, it was called Cozy at the time. It's now apartments.com. But there's so many tools now where you can create a file for your house and the sites will syndicate it out to all the different MLS. So it'll be on Zillow, it'll be on apartments.com, it'll be on realtor.com. You can put a Craigslist ad out. Like filling a vacancy is not as hard as it sounds. And especially in that time, I think there were certain people that were looking. Who we ended up finding was 3 individuals who were displaced from somewhere else they were living and ended up pooling money together to rent our house. But we were able to figure it out. And within 7 days of us moving out, we had people in our property. And the only reason we did 7 days was just so we had some time to go in to clean it up. We left that house with our U-Haul, and then the tenants moved in a week later. because we had lived there for 5 years, what we decided was we paid a small retainer to a friend and a coworker of mine who I had worked very closely with. So it wasn't just a buddy, it was someone who I've seen operate. And I know he's resourceful and responsive and able to, I'm able to trust him. So we basically paid him a retainer to be our boots on the ground or first call if something came up. So we decided we'll handle all the leasing, we'll handle all the major tenant communications, we'll even coordinate stuff with vendors, but we'll have our trusted employee boots on the ground there so that when stuff like, I think anyone who owns rentals has probably had one of these calls where the tenant's freaking out, the light went out in one of their rooms and they assume that the whole electrical panel is busted, but all they had to do was flip the breaker switch. You could pay $150 for a trip fee for on a Sunday for an electrician to come out, or you could just get them to flip the breaker switch. Our contact there, his job was to prevent these very basic things from turning into bigger things. And he could also do stuff like hand off keys. He did some of our walkthroughs when people moved out. And so that was our arrangement. We didn't pay a full on property manager. We were still deeply involved. We still had relationships with tenants. And we liked it that way. And I'm sure we could have property manager that would gladly have taken our money and maybe they would have done a good job. Maybe they wouldn't, but I appreciate the element of knowing what's going on in my business. And I feel, and we'll get to this, when I've worked with property managers, I don't have that feeling that I know what's going on in my business. And so I've seen both sides, self-managing versus working with property managers. And I've got to say, even though self-management has its headaches, I think if you can build the right type of business with the right systems, for me personally and for my wife, that resonates more with us than working with property managers. Now, before I go further, I would say that not all property managers are created equally. There's some phenomenal property managers out there that have excellent communication and, really good teams and go the extra mile for their clients. I just have yet to find a property manager that I would say fits that mold. So I'll stop there for now.
No, I definitely agree. Not all property managers are created equally. There's one thing that you mentioned about the availability of tools nowadays, right? I think we're in this weird point in time where it's almost, and a lot of people are lost as to what type of tools they should use. I'm thinking back to like my early days where Craigslist was the go-to of trying to find a rental of, like, hey, I need a place to live. I'm going on Craigslist to go find something. Like, this is pre Zillow. I don't even know if apartments.com was around at the time. And if they were, it was not a known name. You mentioned like you have a business strategy put in place with your own kind of set of tools to make all this happen. And I'd love to hear about like the tools that you use in your current business, from finding vacancies or fulfilling vacancies, and just how you utilize all of the things that are out there, Zillow, from finding deals and getting to know your process a little bit more. Because you're a big, it seems like you could help people find a rental in under 12 weeks, which is a pretty impressive feat to do, especially with nowadays with home prices being the way that they are, especially trying to find a deal that can cash flow. So I'd love to start learning more about like the actual practices and tools you use and how you put them in place.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. So first of all, the 12-week program we run, obviously there is some work required on the part of the people taking the program. Not a ton. We tried to distill it down to, hey, over the last 7 years, I bought these properties. The partner I work with owns 10 plus properties. And we've tried to distill all the lessons and the hard lessons we've learned and the mistakes we've made and cut all that noise out. So there's a step-by-step process that you can follow that has worked for us. So I just want to preface by saying that, right? 12 weeks is like a straight line path that we've laid out for people to build the fundamental knowledge and skills to be able to invest. So it's not that's how quickly it came together for me. Certainly not. A lot of trial by fire. But yes, from a systems and tools standpoint, I think it's important not to get too caught up in tools because tools come and tools go. But things like listing and leasing properties, it used to be called Cozy. Now it's called apartments.com. I still use that today. So we've been using it for about 5 years. And essentially, you can create a little file for each one of your houses, and you can upload all the pictures that you would want to use, all the information, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, the listing description, your pet policy, whatever this information that you want to share. And with a click of a button, you can activate that listing and it'll push it. There's, I think, a couple different levels. Like the free version will push it out to apartments.com and realtor.com. And then there's like a $30 level that'll boost it to a bunch of other sites, which is usually worth it. And that'll at least get you basic visibility and a link that you can share. You can take applications directly from that same site. The applicant pays $30 and it's a pretty simple process on their part. That'll run a credit check and a background check. And then you'll get notified once that clears. And so you'll basically have in your inbox, it says so and so applied for your property. There's 3 people applying. There'll be 3 names on your lease. Here's the background check for each one. You can have required fields, right? Like you want to require that they have an employer reference and a personal reference. You can turn that on. And so you essentially get a file delivered to you. If somebody's serious enough to pay the $30 and fill all that out, then you have a qualified applicant, right? And then it's your job to do the due diligence and call the references. And in one way or another, you need to follow up with a yes or no to the tenant. Now, I will say that every state has different regulations around this, but you have to be very careful about discrimination laws. You can't obviously discriminate by age or race. Hopefully that's obvious that you can't do that. So I think there are certain scenarios where you might get a not so good feeling if you see a lower credit score or there's something that pops out on the application. Like you have to exercise your judgment about whether that's truly a disqualifier or not. And then ultimately, like we like to get on the phone or meet, if possible, the tenants that are going to be living in our house. And that's another reason why working with a property manager hasn't resonated all that closely with us, because you end up having people living in your home that you don't know. And that is totally fine. And obviously, if you scale past a certain point, you're not going to know every single person that lives in your rentals. But for us, as we were building our business, as we were becoming more comfortable and seeing what works, like having at a minimum, like some level of direct contact with the tenant can prevent a lot of very big mistakes. And I have a couple stories about that. We'll see if we have time for them, but where basically we were not in direct contact with our tenants only to find out that like the managers we had been using weren't doing their job. And so by the time we did get in direct contact, so much kind of damage had been done and trust had been lost that it was really hard to get back on solid footing. So that's one of the reasons that me personally, I like having the direct contact, even though it can be a nuisance at some level. I think if you set appropriate boundaries and ground rules that like, hey, yes, here's when you can contact me and expect an answer. Here's what you can do under emergency circumstances. Here's what actually is an emergency and what isn't. If you do something that you think is an emergency, but it doesn't fit these parameters, it will be at your expense. It's all about setting expectations. And I think that starts with the application in the leasing process. If you can master that process and then have them sign the lease, run through the lease with them, answer any questions they have up front. And then at the end of that, ask them, is this all crystal clear? Is there anything you have a question about? Do you understand what would happen in these different circumstances? If they say yes, they're crystal clear and you've done a good job setting expectations, like there should be very few reasons that this won't work well for you. Obviously, you still have to answer their calls as they come in, but yeah, I think it's just all about setting things up on the front end. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have a couple buddies who have never used property managers, and every single one of their tenants has a direct line to them. They're very hands-on in the entire process, from the application stage to just them living in the house and moving out. One of my buddies always talks about the sniff test. Like he basically, somebody on paper might not look that great, but after you talk to them, it's, oh, I'd much rather rent my house out to you after talking to you and getting to know you, versus applicant B, who on paper might look like a better tenant, but after talking to them, you just get this weird irky feeling from them, and could potentially cost you some damages. Like you mentioned, you had somebody and that line of setting expectations with your tenants, I think, is really important to also just differentiate you as a landlord versus a slumlord, right? There's, especially nowadays, a very big kind of like marketing and branding around eat the landlords. All landlords are bad just because it's a few bad actors are just ruining the reputation for everybody. And I think that expressing to your tenants that you're not one of those people, you're just setting yourself up for success. And the chance of you going through a final walkthrough after they move out and not finding concrete in your plumbing is substantially higher. Because that's never want to have that experience.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I think people appreciate when you approach them and speak to them like they're humans and also express that you're a human and that yes, there are rules. There is a legal lease agreement in place between the two of you that is also backed up by state law. So there's some governance around your guys' agreement with each other, but at the same time, it's one person talking to another person. And I think most people are reasonable. And if you can express that you will be reasonable, but that there are rules, like those two things running in tandem, again, you're setting yourself up for success if you can frame it that way versus just like being faceless and not having any interaction or interfacing. And again, a lot of the stuff I've learned the hard way too, right? Like we've had our hands off at certain times when I wish they were more on. And so a lot of what I try and teach is how to go about this, right? This all sounds nice, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of communication and some of it can be standardized, but some of it just has to be done in real time as you're actually going through and buying a property and getting it set up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I feel like sometimes the whole aspect between landlord and tenant is a little impersonal. And it's nice to know that there's people out there like you taking a different approach. We're coming up on the hour here, and I just had a couple of questions I wanted to get from you before we moved or ended the session. As a prequel into what I want to end the conversation and eventually just talk about market sentiment and what you think the future of real estate looks like and market conditions, is just talking about how you're sourcing your new deals, how you can help other people source new deals. It seems like every home that's currently listed on the MLS just doesn't pan out on paper. And if you do find one, it's after days, if not weeks, if not months of sifting through and doing appraisals and ARV checks on them and seeing what they could rent for. And if the math pans out, like, how are you approaching with this super inflated home price where it almost seems like no deal is investment worthy of where you're looking to acquire more properties? Are you sacrificing location or quality of neighborhood? What's your kind of method about all this?
Yeah, it's a great topic, man. And I mentioned at the beginning, we own properties in Las Vegas, Nevada. We own two in central Washington in a town called Wenatchee that probably nobody's ever heard of. But it's a beautiful area in the Cascade, at the edge of the Cascade Mountains on the Columbia River. Even though nobody's ever heard of it, it's still very expensive and only getting more expensive as people from Seattle move across the mountains to a cheaper area with lots of nature. And so both of those markets ran up quite a bit, such that they're not even really affordable for my wife and I at the moment. In 2021, right around when our daughter was born, we started buying houses in Iowa in an area called the Quad Cities for the exact reasons that you mentioned. I always joke that the down payment on a house in Washington is more than the purchase price of a house in Iowa. And you could buy a nice 3-bed, 2-bath house for about $125,000 that'll rent for $1,400. Those aren't necessarily growing on trees, but you can find them in this area in the Quad City. It's a very stable, not volatile, rental friendly, landlord friendly market. And so we ended up buying 3 houses there in 2022. The same, yes, there has been some appreciation and a little bit of volatility since we bought those in 2022, but there are still those opportunities there. Now, the Quad Cities in Iowa is not a very well known destination, but there are plenty of markets like that across the Midwest and the South, basically the non coastal areas where you can get good cash flow. You can get at a minimum 2 to 3% appreciation per year and find affordable homes that will make money. Now, circling back to the first part of your question, though, things don't pencil out, like we have to remember that just because a property is listed at a certain price doesn't mean that's the price that you should pay for it, nor does it mean that's what you have to offer or underwrite your deals at, right? So one of the core components of the course I teach is how to underwrite deals based on what it is that you need out of them. And it's okay if what you need is not the same as what the seller is willing to part for a property with. If seller wants 200,000, but you can only pay 110, you can make the decision to yourself, I'm just going to pass because there's no way he's going to take it. Or you can write the offer for 110. Probably 99 times out of 100, that's going to fall flat, but you never know. I'll share this really quickly. Like we sold one of our houses in Vegas last year. We sold it due to some personal circumstances. It was the house that we lived in and got married in. So it was even a more emotional, sentimental decision. It was very difficult for us, but essentially we were able to sell it at a solid gain. We were able to exclude some capital gains tax due to part of the tax code that allows you to do that if you've lived in a house for a certain amount of time. And we use that money to help fuel our move and save up some cushion for having these twins, right? That was that's not something you would ever know by looking at the MLS. We listed our house for sale. We didn't list on there moving because we're super motivated to get money so we can afford our life. Like I didn't put that in the listing, right? Like, that was behind the scenes. There's extra factors at play, right? And so ultimately we ended up accepting an offer that was about $30,000 less than the list price. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that, like, you never know what somebody is thinking when they're trying to sell, especially in today's market. And so my personal philosophy has evolved a lot more to I'd rather send 100 offers at a price that I can afford to pay and get the returns that I need and get 99 or even 100 no's, knowing that eventually there will be something that gets a yes, and I won't be stretching outside of what I can actually afford to pay for it, as long as I stick to that process and have some discipline. So I think the shortest way to say that is don't offer something more than you can afford to pay just because of the list price. This is like simple economics, the supply and demand, right? If people want to sell for 200,000, but there's no demand at 200,000, eventually that price will come and meet what the market is willing to pay for it. So that's part one. Is I think you have to build some thick skin and accept that there's going to be a higher volume of offers that you have to send and deals you have to analyze. One of the very, very basic tenets of the process we teach is analyze at least one deal a day, even if you do only weekdays. I can teach you to analyze the deal in about 5 minutes using a site I use called dealcheck.io. It's free and it can import the property data from the MLS. You plug in a couple numbers and it tells you exactly what you can afford to offer. And then you can draft that into what's called a LOI, a letter of intent, not a formal purchase agreement, but it's just a document that says, dear seller at this address, here's a letter showing that I intend to pay $110,000 for the property located at this address. Please call me back at this number between these hours if you're interested. And you fire that off to the agent, and they may or may not call you back. They may tell you to go kick rocks. But again, one of these days, somebody's going to call you back. And if you have that as part of your daily rhythm and you have the thick skin to hear all the no's, you're going to get a yes one day and you're going to find yourself another nice property that fits your parameters. So that's like and the reason I'm so passionate about out of state investing is once you open up the map and you realize that you can do this anywhere in the country, there is nothing stopping you from finding another deal. You just got to broaden your net a little bit. So I hope that answered your question. Let me know if I missed any parts of it.
No, 100%. I'm a really big advocate over using your personal story as a frame of reference for other people of just, you have no idea the circumstances of the seller. And I just spoke to a lady who has inherited her property that she grew up in from her parents because they passed away. And her taxes on a yearly basis are like $5,000. She's not pressed to sell at all. She gets multiple like low bid offers. And in my opinion, the house is super overpriced on the market currently, but she doesn't care because the carrying cost of the house is just so low that the house has been on the market for over or close to a year at this point. Opposite to that, you go and I'm talking to another property. It's listed at 1 million. The guy's in foreclosure and he's just trying to sell the house to avoid the foreclosure. And he's not trying to file bankruptcy. And there's $500,000 of equity in the house that he's missing out on potentially just because he's trying to sell the place quickly. Every circumstance is different. And I think what you're saying is just send out the offer. You're never going to gain any traction unless you take action and send offers out. You can analyze 100 deals a day, but at the end of the day, if you don't, push out any formal offers to buy anything, you're not going to get anywhere. And getting a lot of it's, some people just emotionally aren't really cut out for it. And I think it's a really good first step for a lot of people is to, get told no 100 times, 200 times, 300 times, because, it gets you that thick skin and it prevents you from also just making a terrible financial decision. Like the one thing that I'm always like an advocate for, especially new people starting out in the space, is forcing a deal. And once you start breaking your own rules, your own risk protocols, and your own strategies just to get another house under your belt, like that one house can make you lose a lot of money. And it's like where this whole weird spot on X comes into play, where everybody makes it seem so easy in the world of real estate. And there's a lot of winners on here, but for every winner, there's a bunch of losers. I always heed caution to people to, if there's people out there that are successful and they have certain kind of rules set in place, don't break those rules just so you can pick up another deal. But yeah, I guess the last thing I want to ask before we reach the top of the hour is, what are you thinking about the future? There's a lot of talk about how much the market has inflated within the past couple of years. Things have basically been going up ever since 2010, 2012. Some people are just completely priced out of their market. There's the conversations around supply and demand, just how supply is just extremely low, but demand's high. And everybody's either waiting for a massive correction or for rates to come down and then thinking home prices are going to go up. Obviously, none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know what the future looks like, but just would love to hear your opinion on what you think the future of home values are going to be like, and interest rates and things of that nature.
I love this. I don't think anybody's ever asked me to publicly make any predictions, and I'm very cautious to do so. But I'm flattered that you want to know my opinion.
Listen, like I said, I know nobody has a crystal ball. Like personally, I'm very bearish, but I will always bite my tongue. I always say that this is my personal opinion and you should take it and throw it out the window, because ultimately I'm just some dipshit that lives in the US that doesn't know anything about anything. And even the financial gurus with multi-million dollar portfolios don't know what's going to happen either.
True to your name, right? Your handle used to say you're a shill, not a guru. And I love that. But to the predictions, yeah, I will not pretend to be a macroeconomist or have any real understanding. Even the people that are professional economists usually get it wrong on some accounts. But one thing that does seem very clear is that there is still an enormous mismatch between the supply available, especially new housing, and the demand. Affordability still is a huge issue. So I am squarely in the middle of the millennial generation. I'm 34 years old right now. A lot of people that are my age that I know that are very good friends of mine that make decent money still can't afford to buy homes in the markets that they live in, most of which are in coastal markets. I grew up on the West Coast, but that is an issue, right? That keeps rent in demand. So I do believe that there will always be people to rent homes, and especially if you can find a market that has at least stabilized population, right? You don't want to necessarily invest in a town that has population decline, but very few places do have population decline. So even an area like I chose in the Quad Cities, it has a very modest amount of population growth over the last 5 years, but I'll take any growth over decline. I have a whole list of metrics that I use and that I teach people to look out for. And this actually came up in one of the classes that I teach the other day. We were talking about how to pick a market. And someone asked me like, hey, is there a weighting or some sort of like market health score? And I know there are people that teach, this market gets an 8.4 out of 10. And you can do stuff like that. And I'm not knocking it, but I would say that so much of what you look for as an investor is a personal decision that the weighting is going to look different from person to person. And so, like, the message I would say regarding predictions or anything like that is try to take everything with a grain of salt. Even if I'm giving you one-on-one coaching, all I'm doing is sharing my perspective. It may or may not align with your perspective. And you have to keep your goals, your family's financial health and security front and center. And every piece of information that you take in needs to be interpreted through the lens of, is this the right move for me and the people I care about at this time in my life? So I'm not trying to deflect your question, but I'm just trying to say that I think it's very important to really keep that lens in mind and try to be conscious if you're consuming information that might be leading you one direction or another, knowing that whoever wrote it for whatever source they work for, they're not you. And they probably don't know you or understand you. Only you do. And so I just think that part is very important.
No, I couldn't have said it better myself, man. Very eloquent. Everybody needs to focus on their own risk parameters, their own life objectives, their own life situation. Everybody and their brother has an opinion on how they should take their financial matters on. You're pretty active on X. The conversation around, oh, do you pay off your house at a 2% mortgage rate, or do you, put that money in a high yield savings fund and skim the 3%, right? Everybody is so argumentative about that, but everybody's financial situation is different. Everybody's emotional impacts of or like being in debt is different. And, for some people, it carries a lot more weight to pay off that mortgage at 2% versus, saving a couple $1,000s here and there by skimming 3% and putting the money in a high yield savings account. So very eloquently said. The last thing, just plug yourself, or do you have anything else besides X, any other kind of platforms you're on that you want to share your handle for?
Sure, man. First of all, thanks again so much for setting this up and for having me. You asked me some questions and you don't need to apologize for any of them. I actually love talking about that stuff. And I think so much of real estate investing is a personal journey. So anything that I shared from my personal journey that can either inspire or give additional perspective, I'm always happy to talk about. So thank you again. I'm most active here on X. A handle is at Aaron Ameen. I post several times a day and I'm very easy to reach here. I write a newsletter and host a podcast called The Hybrid Real Estate Professional. Newsletter goes out a couple times a week. Podcast goes out once a week. And most recently, the thing I am channeling my energy into, a lot of energy this year, is the Remote Real Estate Academy. I launched this with a partner of mine and actually going to have my personal business coach join us and produce some additional content. Yeah, so we have a whole 12-week foundations course. That's how to buy your first out of state rental and set up all the systems. And then we're going to work on all sorts of additional pathways, how to self manage, how to build and structure your business, and several other things that allow someone to go from zero knowledge all the way to running and scaling an out of state investment business. So that's called the Remote Real Estate Academy. You can go to remoterealestateacademy.com to get the information there. We currently have a beta cohort running. It's about 16 people in there right now. And then we're planning to open that up to the public again back in April. And I am really excited about that. I think anybody who's even tangentially interested in out of state investing is going to find everything they could possibly need behind the walls of that community. And we're having multiple options so that it's affordable entry for everyone. And you can do everything from just join the community as a participant all the way up to getting one-on-one mentorship. So trying to make it successful. I'm very passionate about it. I love helping other people unlock these outcomes for themselves and their families. And if you're interested, or anybody that's interested, I would love to hear from you.
Awesome, man. Again, thank you for your time. It was awesome speaking to you, listening to your story, hearing your insights. I definitely will be on the lookout for that April launch. As I mentioned, I've always kept out of state rentals at an arm's distance, just over my personal risk, but you make it seem really appetizing and the numbers sound really good on it. Yeah, man. Again, just thank you so much. I hope everybody that listened found this valuable. If you guys can like the spaces, comment, retweet it, that'd be super appreciated. The recording will get reposted here in a little bit. But just, yeah, thank you for everybody coming out and dropping by. And Aaron, thanks again for taking your time.
Thank you so much. And anyone, feel free to shoot me a DM if you have any follow up questions
Awesome. All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.
later.